And I'm going to start the recording while y'all are doing that. How do we define melody? It's kind of a tough term to define because I think we all know what a melody is, but trying to come up with a like textbook definition for it can be a little bit funky. Fortunately, you all have a textbook, so you can look and see what that textbook definition is. All right, good. Somebody put in there a series of single notes that add up to a recognizable whole or the main flow of a song or piece. That's a good definition. And the big thing to remember here when you're looking for the definition of melody, because that is going to be an exam question, is remembering that it is a series of single notes. Okay, a series of single notes. So, for instance, if I grab my guitar, I just scared the death out of my dog. If I grab my guitar and I play, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, that is a series of individual single notes by themselves that add up to a recognizable whole. Right. So a melody is generally something that you recognize, something that you can tune, that you can sing the tune for. If I play this, hopefully you all recognize that melody, right? So the songs that you know by heart, most of the time, it's the melody of those songs that you remember, okay, that you recognize, right? So the next couple of terms having to do with melody are the difference between stepwise and leap motion. So stepwise motion means that it moves up or down the scale. So you're moving one letter at a time. Okay, so I think the example that the book gives, um, one of the examples of melody that the book gives is Mary Had a Little Lamb, which starts with stepwise motion. If we were to look at that melody or analyze the notes of that melody, the notes go E, D, C, D, E, E, E. So we're moving just one letter name at a time. We don't actually get a skip until we get to the end of that first phrase. So we have step, D, D, D. Then here we get a skip, E, G, G. So we skip up from E to G. And that is leap motion. So leap motion skips a note of the scale. Or several notes. So, for example, in one of your assignments was on Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and the first, the beginning of Somewhere Over the Rainbow starts with a very large skip. So it actually skips an octave. And then it has some stepwise motion in it, but it starts with that very long skip, and that is a question on the assignment: is what is that interval that it starts with? And that is an octave. It's the only interval that I've expected you to learn. By the way, do be careful on that assignment if you haven't already done it. I ask you who is singing in that version of the song. It's not Harold Arlen. If you listen to the song, you probably can guess that it's not somebody named Harold that's singing that song. Harold Arlen was the songwriter, was the composer of the song. But that version is the original version from The Wizard of Oz, and I think you can look up who the actress is who is singing that. Okay, any questions about melody? Okay, so let's skip over to harmony then. So melody is a collection of single notes. So what is harmony? How do we define harmony? So harmony has to do with stacking notes on top of each other. So it's how chords are constructed and how they follow each other. So the harmony in a song is the chord structure. It's how the notes that are stacked up on top of each other are constructed. So one of the things that there's a video in the online version of this textbook where they talk about how melody is kind of the x axis, the horizontal axis of looking at the music, and harmony is kind of the vertical way that we look at the music, how the chords are stacked on top of each other. Okay, so if I play a combination of 3 or more notes, then I get what is called a chord. All right, and any instruments can do this as long as you have multiple instruments playing. If it's a single note instrument, then you can create chords. So a chord is a combination of 3 or more tones sounded at once. Okay, and you can create any kind of chord that you want. There's not any, there's no limitation there. You can take any 3 notes that you want and put them together. I can make a chord that sounds like this. It may not sound very good, and I'm not going to win a Grammy for that chord, but you can make a chord that sounds like that if you want. Okay. Um, so a chord progression then is when we take several chords and we have them follow each other when we create a specific series. Okay. So if I did something like this, then that would be a chord progression. So a chord progression is just a series of chords, or a progression of chords. That makes sense, right? Now, when we talk about chords and we talk about harmonies, we talk about having a consonant or a dissonant harmony. And what is a consonant harmony? Can somebody give me the definition there? What a consonant harmony is? Y'all are not very talkative today. So a consonance is a tone combination that is stable. A tone combination that is stable. It means it feels okay. We can just hang out on that chord and it sounds perfectly fine. So all those chords are perfectly stable sounding chords. But sometimes I'm going to make a chord that has that is dissonant, that is unstable, that has a lot of tension to it. So for example, if I do this, if I just sit on this chord, that makes you feel probably uncomfortable. You feel like it needs to go somewhere else. And when it finally changes chords, it feels like a relief to you. It feels like it's moved in the right direction. Okay, so dissonance is unstable chords, and they typically have tension in them. There's something about them that makes them feel tense to us. It feels like it should be moving on to something else. The book talks about dissonant chords being active. They need to move somewhere else. Okay? So, you wouldn't want me to just chill on some kind of chord that is very tense. You feel like that needs to go somewhere. And if I was sitting down at a piano, I could play some even more unstable or tense chords, but it's would be kind of a pain for me to set it up here in my office. So, all right. So the most fundamental chord that we have in Western music is a triad. Okay. Now, just by looking at the name of it, how many notes do you think a triad is going to have? 3, right? So the definition of a triad is that it is the most basic of chords consisting of 3 alternating tones of the scale. And by alternating tones of the scale, I mean that we're going to skip some notes. So if I write out a C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, if I want to build a C major triad or a C triad in this key, in this scale, then I'm going to take 3 alternating notes starting on C. So I'll take my C, I'll skip D, I'll use the E, I'll skip F, and I'll use the G. And that will be my triad. And that happens to sound like this: C, E, G. And then, of course, on guitar, I have 6 strings, so I can just repeat those notes. So if I play C, E, G, C, E, it creates this lovely sounding C major triad. And we can create a triad with any combination of these. I could instead take D, F, and A, and I can make a D minor chord. Or I can go E, G, B and make an E minor chord, or F, A, C, make an F major chord, or G, B, D. So we can loop back around. So if I go, let me grab a different color here. If I go G, oh, that color's almost the exact same. Great job, Logan. Here, we'll go green. If I go G, B, and then skip the C and go to D, then I create another triad. So I can take any scale I want and I can build triads off of that scale. And that would look like this. So this is if I built those triads off of a C major scale. So the bottom notes here are the C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And then all I've done is take every third note from that scale and stack them up. So I used to tell my music theory students that the triad is what we call a snowman chord, because it looks like a snowman. You just stack up thirds to create the triad. Okay, and this is all of the different chords that we create using the C major scale. And these are going to be the common chords that you hear in that key. So if I'm in the key of C, the most common chords I'm going to hear are C, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, and A minor. Now, in classical music, you would also hear a B diminished chord, but we don't really use those in rock because diminished chords are funky. They have a lot of dissonance to them. So typically, you're just going to hear the first 6. And most of our normal chord progressions are built off of that. So we have the lead sheet symbols up here tell us just the name of the chord, C major, D minor, E minor, whatever. Down at the bottom, we use what is called Roman numerals to tell us what key we were in, or to tell us what chords we have. And with Roman numerals, we have to know the key to be able to use the Roman numerals. Notice that we capitalize some of them, and some of them are lowercase. That's because the major chords are going to be capitalized, and then the minor chords and the one diminished chord are going to be lowercase when we're using Roman numerals. So we can then create chord progressions using these symbols, using these Roman numerals. So one of the most common chord progressions in rock music is the 1, 5, 6, and that would be minor, 4 chord progression. This is a chord progression that you hear over and over and over again. So we go from our 1 chord, which we'll use G, to our 5 chord, to our 6 chord, to our 4 chord. And you hear this progression all the time. So those are all built off of triads, okay? And by the way, you've heard that progression using a simple bass line that sounds like this. Nope, I screwed up. Right, if you're familiar with Pachelbel's Canon or the song Memories by Maroon 5, which blatantly uses Pachelbel's Canon as the main part of it. That's just a variation of that same chord progression, okay? Okay. Oh, one more term when it comes to triads and chords, by the way, that I should put on here, and that is arpeggio. So this is another Italian term. We use a lot of Italian terms in music. So arpeggio just means that we're going to break up the chord. It literally translates to broken chord. And it's not broken as in like we played the wrong chord or whatever. It just means that we're going to play the chord one note at a time. So if I go, then I am arpeggiating the triad or the chord. Okay, when we talk about key in music, we are talking about the tonal center of the music. Okay, so the key of a tune is using a central scale or chord. So it is the central scale or chord of the music. So when you hear things like Pachelbel's Canon, is Pachelbel's Canon in D. So D tells you that the key of that piece is D major. Okay? And that is all based around the D major scale. Okay, so everything or most of what that chord is built around is the D major scale. Now, in classical music, we vary from that. We don't just play the chords from the D major scale. We'll use some other chords, but they always will come back to the tonic, which is the central note. So the tonic is the central tone. In rock and pop music, though, most of the time, whatever key we're in, we're not going to vary from that key at all. We might have one or two chords occasionally that'll vary, but for the most part, we stick to a specific tone or key. So if we go back to this triads that we were looking at, these are the chords in the key of C. So our tonic in this key is the C major chord. So no matter what key we are in, the one chord or the first note of the scale or the name of that scale or chord is going to be our tonic. And when we show key in music notation, we show that at the beginning of the piece with what is called the key signature. Okay, and those look like this. So here are all of the different key signatures that you will find in a piece of music. Okay, so this is arranged in what we call the circle of fifths, which is just an order that we use to determine, how we add flats or sharps to our key signature. So whatever key I want to be in, I can find the key signature for it. So let's say I want to be in the key of E. Well, the key of E, according to this, has 4 sharps, and our sharps are always going to go in the same order. In this case, those 4 sharps are F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and D sharp. Okay, if I want to be in the key of A flat, then I'm going to have 4 flats, and those are B, E, A, and D. Now, notice that a couple of these we split the D flat F or G flat F sharp. Those are both common keys, and the same thing with D flat and C sharp. Those are both common keys as well. So we do see those, and as well as B or C flat. Okay, but that's going as far as we can. 6 sharps. Or 7 sharps and 7 flats is as far as we can go with keys because there's only 7 tones, right? Beyond that, we're doing what we call artificial keys, which you don't need to worry about. Okay. Now, this doesn't talk about minor keys. Minor keys are just relative to the same key signature. So, for instance, C major, the relative minor of C major is A. So the key of A minor is the same as the key of C major. So some circles of fifth have the minor keys inside the circle to tell you that, but you don't need to worry too much about that. So this is a key signature, and it just tells us what the key is, what sharps and flats, what the scale is that we're going to be related to. So if I'm in the key of A, I've got 3 sharps, F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp, and that scale would sound like this. And the chords I could use then are A, B minor, C sharp minor, D major, E major, F sharp minor, and then G diminished, which we probably wouldn't use because it's hard to play it on guitar. G sharp diminished, I should say. Okay, so that is key, pretty easy concept there. And a more complex concept here that I want to spend a minute talking about is texture, is musical texture. So the definition of musical texture, I'm just going to give you because you guys have been pretty quiet today, is the number of layers of sound, layers of sound that are heard at once. So the number of layers that are heard at once and how they relate to each other. Okay, so musical texture all has to do with the layers. And we've got 3 common terms here, and I really want to make sure that you understand these terms because we're going to talk about them over and over and over again this semester. And those terms are monophonic, polyphonic, and homophonic. So anytime that I ask you about texture, the answer I'm looking for is going to be one of these 3 terms. Okay, these are the different kinds of textures that we're going to study this semester. And some pieces of music will vary in texture. They'll start monophonic and then they'll have some homophonic parts or whatever. So using what we know about prefixes and suffixes, we can kind of figure out what this means, right? Because mono is a common prefix, phonic is a suffix. So what does mono mean? One. Okay. So we have one of something. What does phonic refer to? Does anybody know what phonemes are? Yeah, phonic has to do with sound. So monophonic literally means one sound. Okay. So an example of monophonic texture would be if I'm singing Row, Row, Row Your Boat by myself. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. That was monophonic texture. There's nothing else going on. It's just me singing that song. The same thing if I were to just play the melody on guitar. So just one note happening at a time, that is monophonic. And also, if I have multiple people singing, but we're all singing the exact same thing, we're all singing in unison or octaves, we consider that to be monophonic. So if we were all going to sing Row, Row, Row Your Boat together, then that would be monophonic. There's just one sound, there's one melody happening. Okay? So what do you think polyphonic means? If monophonic means one sound, what does polyphonic mean? Multiple sounds or many sounds. And specifically, monophonic refers to multiple melodies happening at the same time. Because homophonic is also going to have multiple sounds, but we're going to talk about that in a second. So polyphonic means multiple melodies happening at the same time. So another example of that is row, row, row your boat. When you were in elementary school, you probably sang row, row, row your boat as a round, where one group, you were split into three groups, and one group started row, row, row your boat gently down. And then when the first group got to gently, the next group started in with row, row, row your boat. And then when that group got to gently, the third group started in with row, row, row your boat. So that creates a polyphonic texture where you can have multiple things happening at the same time. If you look in your book, page 47, there's the sheet music for the round of row, row, row your boat is happening. And if you go to the fifth measure of that, which is the beginning of the second line, you can see what the polyphonic texture looks like. You can see, even if you're not familiar with reading music very well, you can actually see that the everybody's singing a different part at this point. You have one voice singing merrily, 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 another voice singing gently down the stream, and another voice singing row, row, row your boat. And all of that is happening at the same time. So that's going to be polyphonic music, multiple melodies happening at the same time. In homophonic music, you have one melody with harmony underneath it, or multiple parts in harmony with each other. So if I were to again pick up my guitar and play row, row, row your boat, but I was going to play a chord progression underneath it, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Then that would be homophonic in texture because I have one melody happening and the other stuff is chords. The same thing if we were all to sing in harmony. If we all started on different notes, but we were all singing the same basic melody, row, row, row your boat, but somebody else was going, row, row, row your boat, and somebody else was going, row, row, row your boat, then we would all be in harmony, but we're singing the same melody in harmony with each other. That would be homophonic texture as well. So if you think of like a hymn, like a church hymn, where everybody's singing in harmonies, but everybody's moving at the same time, that's considered to be homophonic music. And that's one of the ways that I remember that is homophonic or hymn. A hymn is homophonic. Maybe that'll help. All right. Questions about texture. So if I ask you about texture in music, there are three possible answers. What are they? If I were to say, what is the texture of this piece of music? You have three possible answers that you can put. What are they? Monophonic, polyphonic, or homophonic. Perfect. Good. Okay, and lastly, I want to talk a little bit about form. So form is just the organization of the musical ideas in time. Musical ideas in time. So form is the way that we divide up the music and organize it. And this is completely basically made up, right? We don't, a lot of times composers, most composers will think about form when they're writing, but this was something that's usually added after the fact. Music theorists go back and look at the music and say, okay, here's the structure, here's the form. Now, composers learn how to write in certain forms, so a lot of times they follow a form on purpose, but sometimes we kind of make it up. Okay, so there are two most common types of forms, and those are binary and ternary. And that has to do with how many parts there are. Again, using what we know about prefixes and suffixes and, terms and all that stuff. What is binary? How many parts does a binary piece probably have? Two. So binary is going to have two sections that we would label an A and a B section. So we would have one section and then another section. What is ternary then going to mean? Ternary then is going to be three sections, an A section, a B section, and then usually a return of the A section. So for example, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is in ternary form. We have the A melody, the B melody, and then we go back to the A melody. So that would be a three-part form. Another way that you might think about form in pop music is that you have like a verse and then a chorus. So like verse, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. That might be the form of a rock song. If you play in a contemporary church band, you're probably very, very familiar with this form. Most contemporary church music uses that form. Okay? And there's a few different terms for form that we'll get into later on. All right, and that does it for chapter part one, actually getting all the way through the chapters. Anybody have any questions about part one? Any specific questions about assignments or the exam that you may not have gotten that I can help you with? I'll stick around for a few minutes if you want to ask me. Make sure you get your assignments done that are due tonight. Make sure you get the exam done over the weekend if you're going to do it online. Otherwise, we'll do it on Monday. And if you do the exam online, I will see you in class on Tuesday, or on Wednesday, I should say. I will be back on campus next week, so those of you that come in person will be able to do class in person next week. So just let me know if you have any questions. I'll stick around for a few minutes to try to answer stuff. Otherwise, have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week.